Hi. Are you actually encouraging your kids to disobey you? You just might be. Hi, my name is Rick, and thanks for joining me on this No Perfect Parent podcast. I want to share with you a tip that I learned when I was going through my parenting journey. My family and I lived in Central America for a number of years, and one time we were driving back through southern Mexico. Yeah, I've driven through Mexico several times. Well, this time I had three very hyper kids in the back seat of an old GMC Suburban. We had a lot of miles to drive before we'd reach a safe town to spend the night, and the kids, well, one in particular, had been pushing my buttons all day long, and I didn't want to stop and risk not making it to the town before dark, and so I just kept driving. Driving after dark in parts of Mexico could be very dangerous, and I knew if we pulled over, if I would just attack the problem in the back seat, I could get at least a half an hour of quiet. But I was also afraid that if I pulled over right then and I did what I was dreaming of doing, I might get 50 years in a Mexican jail. Do you ever have your kids just push you until finally, as Papa used to say, I've had all I can stands and I just can't stands no more? Does that ever happen to you? Well, why is it that they sometimes just keep pushing and pushing until you finally get upset and you take that dreaded action? Well, you've probably seen those invisible dog fences. When the dog wanders past the certain, quote, fence line, a shock lets him know he's gone too far. Now imagine a sadistic owner who constantly moved that fence line in and out and in and out. Well, the only way the dog could find his limits is to go further and further until he got shocked. Some parents are like that with their children. They make a rule. They establish a fence line. If you cross this line, negative consequences will follow. It might be telling a toddler, don't touch that. Or it might be establishing a curfew for a middle schooler. But when the child crosses the line, nothing happens. It's just too much work for the parent to zap them. So we act like we didn't notice. Or, even worse, we maybe waste some perfectly good air by giving them a useless lecture. But the child is left wondering, where are my real boundaries? They have to keep pushing and pushing further and further until they feel the bzzz, the shock when you actually do something, you actually take action. Even as adults we do that, don't we? We push the authority until they take action. So is the speed limit what the sign really says it is? Well, everyone knows you don't get a ticket unless going 10 miles over the posted speed. So isn't that the real speed limit? If you daily drove past a patrol car and you were doing 15 miles an hour over the speed limit and they never pulled you over, wouldn't you begin to assume that the real speed limit is plus 15? There's a place for grace, but when we do not give the promised negative consequences, whatever that might be, for their disobedience, we really make our word meaningless, and we actually push our children to behave more and more outlandishly until they can figure out where the real fence line is. When are mom and dad really going to take an action? And too often the real fence line is when we lose our temper. And so that might be here today and there tomorrow, depends on what happened, how the day's been going for us. But then we discipline out of anger. Why not just enforce the fence line where you originally said it would be? Presumably you had a good reason for setting it there. Why do we let them push us until we get angry before we do what we promised we would do? You see, love, not anger, needs to be our motivation for enforcing the rules we make. And then we can enforce the rule before we get angry just out of love. And we can do it with self-control. If the rule that we made is a dumb rule and we realize it later, if it's not in the best interest of the child, then drop it. Tell them, hey, that was wrong. That was really dumb of me. I'm sorry. Don't worry about that rule. Drop the rule. Admit you made a mistake. But if there's a legitimate reason for the rule, then enforce it. It's the best thing to do. It keeps you calm, and they know where the fence line is. They're not always having to push to figure out, well, where is it going to happen today? What's the new rule? What's the new limit? Think about it. Deuteronomy 8:5 tells us this. Just as a parent disciplines a child, the Lord your God disciplines you. Why? For your own good. That needs to be our motivation for disciplining our children, for their own good. Set the limit, enforce the limit, make it easy on everybody. Hey, remember, the only treasure on earth we can take with us to heaven is our children. You know, if you enjoy these short podcasts, I want to encourage you to share them with someone you know that would benefit from them. And hit that subscribe button below, too, so that you'll get each new update.